Hello, it's Harry Reasoner again. Another nice day, and I'm out here with Dave. I'm not sure how much longer I can milk this dog in the water theme, but I have some more to say, but I do understand that you're not as taken with my dog as I am. And that's okay. But today I want to talk a little bit more about Darwin. I want to talk about inheritance. I want to talk about whether or not Darwin was a racist, which has been asserted, of course. I want to talk about some of the initial objections to Darwin's theory, which of course were emotional and not intellectual. And I guess I'd like to talk a little bit about the Bible. I think I might be cutting this short. It looks like there's a storm coming. That sky is getting pretty dark, though I think it would be a funny irony if I were to be struck by lightning. Anyway, back to Darwin and inheritance. Darwin didn't know anything about inheritance. The thinking at his time was that inheritance was somehow blending. I recall reading one description of it, including diagrams that showed that actually the sperm cell, which they did understand was related in some way to reproduction, actually contained a microscopic human that just simply needed to grow. Now, Darwin didn't know anything about inheritance, the gene, the DNA, the good old double helix. He didn't know anything about it. Actually, the structure of DNA was almost a century in the future for him. Does that mean that Darwin was wrong? Was Darwin wrong? Because after all, the cornerstones and one of the basics of his theory, as I mentioned in my previous video, was variation. And without understanding genetics, DNA, mutation, etc., as we do now, Darwin had no way to explain or describe the source, the origin of that variation, nor could he explain how it could persist in populations and be passed down. He had no way of doing that. But in true scientific nature, his theory, in effect, was predictive of what we now know about genetics and DNA and inheritance. It is that most powerful aspect of science, that it builds upon itself and that it is dynamic, that so intrigues me. It is this dynamic nature of science that is so often misunderstood by creationists, who basically belittle science by saying that scientists are not sure of anything and that they're constantly making up stories and corrections. But it is precisely that that makes science so powerful. It should never be dogmatic, though admittedly some scientists are somewhat dogmatic, because after all they are humans too. Anyway, in case you're wondering, my dog, since he's been about 3 months old, can all day long drag rocks out of the river and throw them on the bank. Now, was Darwin a racist? Now, it of course has been asserted that he was, and it's pointed out by those who are very shallow readers that he uses the word race in the subtitle of his book, The Origin of Species. But what Darwin meant by race was simply referring to the variety that I had mentioned. And his use of the word race has nothing whatsoever to do with the word race as it is used now in discussions of racism in the political world. As a matter of fact, Darwin was an outspoken opponent of slavery. Now, slavery and racism aren't the same. They're not equivalent, but of course slavery is a practice that was certainly based on racial inequality. Of course, anyone who cares to actually read what Darwin wrote would recognize that in his journals that he composed during his time on the Beagle, he he spoke at great length about his abhorrence with the treatment of slaves. Of course, slavery that he was speaking out against was of course being practiced in the southern United States by good Christian folk. And of course we see in the Bible that God himself had no particular problem with slavery when he made the covenant with Abraham in Genesis. God told Abraham that in order to gain wealth and be the father of many nations, all he had to do was mutilate himself. He just had to circumcise himself. Now, if you read a little bit further, what it actually says is that not only does Abraham have to circumcise himself, he must see to it that all the males in his household are circumcised. And it's very clear. He has to circumcise those males, whether Abraham himself sired them or whether Abraham just simply bought them. One would think that a loving, just God would insist that, well, before he turned over great wealth and the promise of many nations, he would insist that Abraham commit to freeing his slaves and that he would commit to not purchasing any more. It's very clear in that passage that the Bible was written by men with all of their flaws and faults, and I guess you could say that the Bible was inspired by a belief in God. But that is not equivalent to saying that it was inspired by God himself. There, I don't know if you can see him here. I don't know if he's showing up. Oh, there he goes. It's the serpent. I think it was Satan. There's a Baltimore Oriole. Oh, I don't know if that would have shown up there. Baltimore Oriole is a very beautiful bird. Huh. I've been here about half an hour today, and I think I've seen 13 different species of bird here, so. In a much publicized public debate, a number of years after the publication of The Origin of Species, a bishop's wife was overheard to comment to her companion that she certainly hoped that the theory of evolution was untrue, but that if it did turn out to be true, she certainly hoped that it wouldn't catch on. And I find that hilarious. And I find it a poetic summary, really, of creationist arguments. That is, their objection is emotional. It's unpalatable to them. There's certainly nothing that I've ever seen that could be even remotely labeled as intellectual or logical. It's unpalatable. You ready, Dave? You ready? Get it. You can do it. You're too far. Come up. You can do it. Come on. No, you're not getting it. Well, he didn't get the right one, but